Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Music Lab podcast. My name is Dogg, and I'm so excited to be back with all of you for another episode of the podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, our social media pages. That helps us, and that helps the bands, artists, and music professionals that we feature. Also, check out our sponsor, RAR Outfitters. That's RAWR, outfitters.com. Don't just wear, RAR. So, ladies and gentlemen, today I am so excited that we have somebody on the other side of the business, Mr. Chris Anderson, everybody. Welcome, Chris. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, he is the CEO and founder of Anderson Audio. But before you did that, you had a pretty good individual career as well. So tell the audience how you got started in this business.
Well, I don't know if the right word is myopic, but I basically only wanted to do this for as long as I knew what it was. Um, when I was 12, I became aware of what my uncle Jim did, and he was a recording engineer and producer for jazz and acoustical music based in New York City. He also started at NPR before it was NPR in 1971. So by going and seeing Uncle Jim, I was probably at that age enamored with the buttons and microphones and knobs and interesting, environments and stuff like that. So at that age, uh, my folks sent me to a jazz festival in Detroit where my uncle was doing the broadcast mix for the NPR affiliate there, and I got to go see him work. Um, the funny part was, I look back on that, and when I was sitting in the recording truck with him, I was bored because what else would you have but a 12-year-old saying like, "I'm bored." My uncle has a very dry sense of humor and runs in the family, and he basically handed me a manual for the mixing board and said, "Well, read this." And I didn't last long doing that, so I wanted to wander up to where the stage was, which was up in a plaza, and that I found way more interesting than what my uncle was doing, and that was, of course, the live sound, discipline. And so I spent the whole 3 days up there with the live sound people. And the funny part is, this many years later, I would love to be a truck mixer. I would, I would much rather mix music in the big recording trucks, but my fate was sealed. So that was that age, and so as one would do, living in upstate New York, joined the AV club in school and pushed TVs in the hallways, which is what we did back in the 90s, and joined the drama club and was a technician for the theater things and stuff like that, and worked in the summer theater deal, basically just doing anything that had anything to do with audio. Um, and eventually found my way to Lebanon Valley College, which is just up the road from us here, and went through the recording program there. Again, in the 90s, there were not a lot of schools that taught live event production. Most people, if they sought schooling, went to a recording college or school that offered a recording program, where you kind of learn an adjacent set of skills. Um, and today, some programs have modernized and started to teach kind of the live event side of things. So I had a lot of great breaks along the way. Couldn't have planned it moving forward, but when you look back, it all kind of sews together. Um, some of my summer stock work doing theater, I met some sound designers that work in New York City, doing Broadway work, and I got my first internship in New York at a company called Promix, which became PRG. Most people in our industry know who PRG is. But they provided all the audio equipment for Broadway shows. And so I got a really quick leg up with that. Ended up touring on Broadway shows and musicals, and that kind of dovetails into corporate work pretty easily. So if I had to put the dates to it, I got my internship in '93 at Promix. I did not walk at my own graduation because the internship was way more interesting to me. So I don't. My mom has never said anything bad about that, but she can't have been happy.
Yeah.
Um, and when again, I tell that to students that I work with today, like don't screw around with your internship, take it seriously because any company would pick you up in a moment if you've paid attention and shown up on time.
Yeah.
Because one thing kind of springboarded into the other for me.
So
So
were
I
there
toured.
any when you were doing the Broadway stuff, like from talking to people and just from word of mouth and just from what you witnessed, were there any theaters that were like more trouble or more like that you had more issues with the sound than others, or were they pretty much all
Uh, so venues definitely get reputations. Um, Interestingly, theaters, I think by their nature, do tend to fall into a narrower category of acoustical concerns. They're usually shaped very similarly. They have a lot of soft goods, curtains on stage. The seats are usually padded or have fabric. So there's a couple of ways to look at that. When it comes to shows that sit for months and months or years even, those sound systems and the design of the audio is so refined at that point that those are very controlled for. They don't tend to have a show that sounds really bad because they would have been able to fix that ahead of time. Um, Touring shows where you move from place to place to place do then present those new challenges because you're not always in the same place very long. You don't have as much time to kind of accommodate. So, um, but when I did mostly shows that moved at least weekly, sometimes every 2 weeks. You'd play Boston for 6 or 8 weeks, San Francisco usually 8 weeks. So the certain markets kind of dictated a certain amount of time in the market. But the shows generally translated from theater to theater within reason. Usually the size is what gets you. If you go from a relatively 800, 1,200 seat theater to a 25 or 2,800 seat theater, that's usually brings on your first issues. But the acoustic issues that you run into in the concert and certainly in the corporate business are you're working in spaces that were not meant for performances. The acoustics were never considered in an arena. Arenas are for sports. Hotel ballrooms are for wedding receptions, no matter how big they are. So parallel walls and weird materials and funny angles and all that stuff is most theaters you run into, somebody tried to think of that at least. So yeah, I wouldn't say that like there's none that stand out as horrific in that business. There's certainly notable spaces on the concert business that are, people don't want to go back to.
yeah. So, was there a conversation that you can remember, maybe like as a teenager, as a high school, or even as in college, that you had with an adult that really kind of inspired you within this industry, particularly?
Hmm. I definitely have some notable conversations, uh, but that still stick with me. But the interesting thing was when I was looking for this in the end of the '80s and early '90s. The interesting thing was that there wasn't a lot of guidance to be had. And I think some of that has to do with where you live and where you go to school. So I grew up under the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, a town called Horseheads. So very rural area. We only by complete chance had a Broadway designer and some talent come to do summer stock theater there for 5 seasons.
Okay.
Complete luck. And I got involved in that because all the kids in the high school drama club all came and worked, in the different positions, and I ended up jumping into the audio because that's what I wanted to do. So I remember asking around because you were curious about can you make a living doing this? How much money can you make if you wanted to do this? And no one, no one would ever give you a straight answer back then, which kind of drove me a little bit crazy. So the interesting kind of motivations would be that Abe Jacob, the Broadway designer, he was the person that facilitated my internship, and he pretty much just. I remember one day he came in and he handed me the phone number for a guy named Lou Mead, who was the owner of Promix, and was like, "Lou Mead is expecting your call." And then I called the guy, and he's like, Abe Jacob speaks highly of you, and said you're looking for an internship. So that's not much of a conversation, but that's pretty much like kick the door open kind of moment. The other funny thing though was that before that, and I was telling this story a couple of days ago to somebody. I was um, not excited to go to college at all. I, grew up in a small town, didn't see why I ever needed to leave and all that kind of stuff. Um, and so the idea of working in the audio biz was all I really wanted to do. And I couldn't imagine having to wait until I was done with school to do that. So when I was speaking to Abe Jacob about that, he said, "Hey, what are your plans after high school?" And I said, "I want to work in the business." And he said, "Where are you going to college?" I said, "I'd just rather work in the business. Like, could I work with you?" And
Mm.
he goes, "You're going to college." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're going to go to college. I will blackball you from the industry." The funny part is that's, of course, a non-threat because it doesn't really exist. But I thought that was kind of funny because at the time, I mean, you're talking, I was probably 17 or 18.
Sure.
I believed him 100% and knew that I had to get my butt to school. So, and that's certainly a thing. Um, the guy that ran the program at Lebanon Valley at the time, he was always good for some pretty dispassionate advice about what to do and how to do it. Um, so some of the adages like, you know, you don't know when like your time will come in the same way like lightning strikes. You don't know when or where, but you need to be ready when it happens.
Yeah.
And he was giving kind of advice on being engaged in school. He's like,
Sure.
be in the studios, work with the upperclassmen, get to know everybody, be around. Like if you're not there, you're going to miss it.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have an exact quote, but like that was absolutely something he kind of wound you up with initially was like, you have to be there when it happens. And he's right, because everything that I could credit to moving me along has been very much a moment of like, here was a turning point kind of thing.
Yeah.
I got my job at that summer stock musical back home. I had to get working papers to start, so I must have been 15. They paid me cash to come and just pull cables when they were setting up in the second season of the show, and it took place in a hockey arena that they converted into a theater every year. And so it was a lot of cable to pull. So I pulled all the cable, and then I was a little bit heartbroken when that was over because they were going to start their summer of shows, and I wasn't going to be involved. And what do you know? Um, there was a four-person sound crew for that job. Two of them ran around and put microphones on people. That was, the entry level version. And one of those guys got pneumonia and ended up in the hospital. And the sound guy that season, a guy named Bill Ruger, came up to me and he goes, "What are you doing this summer?" And I said, "Working for you?" And he's like, "Yep." And he's like, "What? Only until Jake was the guy." He's like, "And only until Jake gets better, and then you got to go." And I was like, "I'm in." And Jake never came back to the show. He didn't. Nothing bad happened to him, but I think he was out so long he just didn't come back to it. So there's a moment there. Um,
You were the
and
Tom Brady and he was Drew Bledsoe.
yeah. So yeah, there's a few more of those kind of things where it's like bang, something happened, you said the right word, and now you're moving on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I want to know, obviously, we know what the concert business and industry is today, but I want to go back to the early 90s when you're first getting into it. And I don't mean by like the bands. I want to know like what was the state of the industry then? Like was it thriving? Was it, like you said, was it a good career to be in at that time? Talk about that aspect of it.
Well, I couldn't have known then what I know now. Yeah, greater truths have never been uttered. But it's a very big industry with a lot of stuff. Like a lot of positions, a lot of gear, a lot of people, a lot of everything. So I I wish I had known better or something so that I would have plowed along even more diligently. Um, but uh, so in the end of the 80s and 90s, the industry was mostly dominated by a handful of major touring sound companies. You know, groups that were big enough to logistically deal with, you know, moving bands and shows around, you know, the various continents, North America, Europe, that kind of thing. And I was a total fanboy for that. Those speaker companies like JBL put out a poster series of a picture of a concert sound system and then whose it was and all that kind of stuff. And so I had that stuff on my wall. Um, and basically, every company back then built their own speakers because there was no commercial speaker builder. Um, they also generally repurposed either studio or amplifiers that were never that had installation only. There was no touring amplifier. Mixing consoles had to be built or kind of assembled from radio consoles. Some of that you find in the, I don't want to say mythology, but it's really the background. You know, when there's shows about Woodstock, shows about like some of those early concerts and how they scrapped together a sound system out of somebody's stuff in a basement, you know, and that was the 70s into the beginning of the 80s. So the industry is not that old. Um, Out of those first gen companies came the principles of many of the current mega companies. Certainly in our area, you know, they're not called Clare Brothers anymore, but back in the day it was Clare Brothers and it was Roy and Jean Clare,
Mm.
farmers from Lidditz that were doing concerts. Um, you know, that company's now a juggernaut, and they're certainly the world's largest, and they've bought up a couple of the other ones, actually more than a couple. Um, their success is, you know, pretty hard to miss. Um, but you know, Meyer Sound, the big speaker manufacturer, John Meyer, the founder of that company, worked for a regional sound company on the West Coast called McCune, and it was called Harry McCune Sound Services. And he had his technicians, his guys, build speakers for him. And John Meyer of Meyer Sound and Ken Deloria of Apogee's not around anymore, were from McCune Sound. And so, I mean, they became, you know, pioneers of loudspeaker building. They were sound guys at McCune doing sound at rodeos and stuff like that. Um, the cool thing is I came on to my scene right at the end of the 80s into the beginning of the 90s. We saw some McCune sound equipment still floating around the business. You know, people had bought it, it had been sold to East Coast shops. Promix actually started with McCune gear and quickly moved into Meyer. Um, so really like a really kind of quick gestation of some of that technology forward. The processed loudspeaker amplifier, active amplifier processing, like things that are used very widely now were just being kind of developed then. So the 80s and 90s, I actually like to say that that's back when audio was hard to do. I do get a little bit of that curmudgeonly thing with some of the younger folks running around today that, you know, they have more technology than any of us had ever, and that ought to be that creativity and quality should be at its peak in the industry, because what don't you have control over anymore versus kind of the voodoo and you know, raw, uh, you know, just brute force of old sound systems.
Sure.
The finesse and capabilities of the technology today, they just don't even relate. You know, wireless microphones were a disaster when they first came out. You couldn't keep 8 of them running at the same time. You know, the first show I worked on, we had 16 of them, and we actually had to rank them in order of the best one to the worst one so that you made sure the show's leads were on the best ones. And then the actors that only had a few lines got the worst ones, because there was going to be a problem during the show. It wasn't, you never got to the end of a show without wireless problems. Today, I mean, we still have wireless problems, but not with the same repercussions. And the recoverability of a wireless issue is usually very quick. There's backups and there's various techniques and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, and the same thing with equalization and any kind of like digital processing was in its kind of infancy back then. But it was also very expensive to do, very hard to do. And that's why I think it was the domain of so few companies then. And today there's companies everywhere. Mine's an interesting example. I mean, we would have no business in the 90s trying to be a sound company because we might be able to afford 8 speakers, or we'd have to build them and no one would want to use them. And now we have a shop full of this stuff and it's all very viable. And there's manufacturers that make it all. And we're involved with some of those manufacturers like EAW in new product, uh, you know, ideas and noodling and, workshopping some things. And so it's very, very short, like I said, very short span. I mean, it makes the car industry look old.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, the beginning of the 90s, that's when the grunge movement comes
Mm.
in. From a sound guy, is it harder to do like a grunge concert, or is it easier, or is it harder to do like a Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston pop concert?
Mm. That's interesting. I think some of it comes back to who's doing it because there's companies that made their name on that kind of stuff,
Okay.
and you wouldn't want the wrong group of people doing the wrong show. So, and I mean, I certainly like Pro Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, like that was my college basically. So, the most famous company to do that work was called Rat Sound. They're still around, and they're in Camarillo, California. They're the main sound company for Coachella, and but they cut their teeth on Seattle grunge scene. Built their own speakers. They were called Rat Traps. Uh, and Dave Rat is very active on YouTube with a lot of fun little experiments and lessons that he shows about here's why something works and here's why something doesn't work. He's a rocket scientist from that point of view. Um, and if you came up with that music, you were in those clubs with the sound system in there that was probably in tatters, doing that kind of like high energy music. And so I think the people that were doing it then and then did it as it got big just came right from it. But those are, very loud stages, big monitor wedges blazing around the stage everywhere. I mean, it's a cacophony, but the people that were doing that knew exactly what they were doing. Um, and then like again like the Mariah Carey and like that very clean kind of pop with the lead with a vocal out front and usually a big band or an orchestra there.
Sure.
There's a level of control to those environments. Not back in the 90s, there wasn't any. They didn't have in-ear monitors yet, and that kind of stuff. So they were still dealing with noise, but in order to make those shows work, they still had to control for noise. So you probably didn't have somebody with a Marshall stack, blazing away on their guitar. Drums were probably had some amount of shielding to them, that kind of stuff, because you just can't be, kind of cranking away with the lead vocalist out front. So, I think everything kind of fits one to the other. But like I said, you take the wrong people to try to do the wrong show, and it could be a real failure. It is really hard to work on stages that are just all noise. Um, and we're seeing less and less and less of that because in-ear monitors became so popular. And the visceral experience of a stage with monitor wedges and side fills and all that stuff is still kind of relevant. The first time I stepped onto a Foo Fighters set, we were doing a series called the $2 Bill for MTV.
Yeah.
You paid $2 at a club. You didn't know who you were going to see,
Yep.
and I did a lot of freelance. This is back when I still freelance, um, freelancing for TV trucks, and I worked for Sheffield, who's down in Maryland, as a freelancer, and we did the Foo Fighters at the Electric Factory, and I was go out there and Dave Grohl's got 4 wedges in front of him, 4 wedges behind him. And you're like, this ought to be a mess. And actually, when they lit all that stuff up, it was tight. It was loud, but it was very tight, and the energy was unmistakable. So that's a group who spent a lot of time tuning their kind of perfecting their mayhem in a way, like it is not uncontrolled mayhem. I'd actually say that the same thing with I worked with uh oh gosh, don't let me forget it. The group that sprays paint everywhere. I can't believe I'm not thinking of this.
War?
Guar.
Yeah.
I did a Guar show once up in Connecticut,
Nice.
again towards the end of my freelance time, and I was shocked at a couple things. For the mess on stage, the drummer had a Yamaha studio kit, like maple, which was not sprayed. Also, the band can play. They were great. They were solid players, and even though they were famous for ruining things, and you had to wrap the wedges in plastic and all that kind of stuff, that was the show.
Right.
What went on stage was fairly professional and like I said, pretty tight. So it was really hard to tie the scene to the professionalism on stage. So probably
Right.
something to not forget. But it works the other way too. There's a lot of shows that are complete disaster on stage and off.
So tell the audience who is not familiar with obviously this industry how much the in-ear monitor has been a game changer for artists and for musicians.
Um, I'll have to see if I can come up with some really good, similes.
Analogy. Yeah.
Um, but a great way to think of it is just, if you go into a restaurant where you can't hear yourself think because it's just loud and there's stuff coming from everywhere. Every one of those people is a noise source, which you could equate to a speaker or a musician or a vocalist or a monitor wedge or anything. And then the environment you're in, the ceiling and the walls and all that stuff is amplifying all that. So it's just swimming around there, and then nobody can really hear. And the first thing you want to do is turn something up because why would you turn something down? You're going to turn it all back up. So, that's the stage environment that usually, makes shows really hard to do. Um, and wireless technology was the biggest thing that allowed IEMs to happen, this in-ear monitors. Um, because if somebody's going to plug their ear up with an ear mold because they have their earbuds custom molded,
Mhm.
um, the same way they do custom earplugs. So by the time you put that in your ear, it definitely seals your ear up. And so the catch of going without monitor wedges and plugging your ears is if your system does not work, you're rendering yourself almost deaf until you get the device out of your ear. So they had to get robust wireless equipment going first. And then they had to tackle a couple other things, range, the ability to run around on stage and not have what we call dropouts, and then fidelity, to be able to kind of get the frequency response, but also the volume. And that's again a tricky thing because you're playing sound right into your ear. So there's always a concern about damaging your hearing. But kind of getting all that together made IEMs become reliable. And then, of course, as pro gear ends up going, what was very expensive originally eventually gets adopted by other companies to make it at price points that people can afford. And now most musicians can go to Guitar Center and get a usable, IEM system. For good or bad of the cause. So we could do a whole week of these things on wireless technology. But um, so with that in mind, being able to put headphones on, I guess, is the other way to look. If you're in that restaurant and you're miserable, and you can put headphones on that seal out the outside noise and only hear what you want, that's the in-ear monitor experience. For the sound engineers, people kind of forget that microphones hear whatever they're next to. You think of a microphone as the thing you put in front of the thing you wanted to hear.
Mhm.
It's not a great way of looking at it because you want to think of it more as an ear. If you can hear it, it can hear it, and it can get much louder than your ears. So the more you turn up the thing you wanted to hear, the more the everything else comes in with it. And the bane of the sound engineer's existence is trying to get isolation in microphones. when you have a lot of musicians on stage, all the mics hear all the other mics. We have all kinds of industry jokes about that stuff. The microphones that you put over top of the drum set to pick up cymbals are called overheads. We often, if somebody has a really tight stage with a bunch of vocal mics, like 5 vocal mics, everyone's got one. We call them all drum overheads because that's what they are. They're picking up the drum set as well as anybody's vocals. Um, Drummers with vocal mics tend to pick up and kind of smear the sound of the drum kit. That's probably why off and on through the industry you'd see drummers with headsets on.
Mhm.
Phil Collins used to sing on one. There's some other drummers that would sing with headsets on. The problem is they were uncomfortable and not, they weren't the perfect solution, so they never really got popular. Most drummers will just put a microphone on a stand and swing it up and down out of their way.
Right.
Um, so the ability to quiet down the din on stage and get cleaner sounds from the microphones makes tighter and more precise mixing possible, because every time you open a microphone, you're not amplifying everything on stage and then also the thing you wanted to get in the first place.
Right.
So if people pay this much attention, country music was kind of the first group that really started to do that just across the board. So country shows kind of got tighter sound faster. They adopted it quickly. They didn't seem so married to monitor wedges as soon as they could get in-ears to work. Um, there's some people that still don't use them, and there's some people that use them reluctantly, almost out of necessity than anything else. So, um, but as a tool now, they're another piece of the kit.
Yeah.
A lot of people use both. That's kind of a thing. So it's up to the artist. It's like choosing anything else. They'll decide how they want to do something and how they don't. Delivering the sound into the in-ears, the mixing of the ear mixes, that's there's an interesting challenge there, because rather that the person, even if they have a monitor wedge in front of them and the sound comes out of that, they still have their ears and they can hear other things around them. So they don't really end up in a situation where they're in a vacuum. The problem is if your in-ears go out, or if what you're getting is not usable, or there's been, the person mixing them has made a mistake and put the wrong thing in them. That's a lot of times where see artists pull them out, is just that whatever they're not getting what they need, and the easiest thing is to get it out of their ear so they can hear anything at all. So there's a lot of skill in mixing in ears, and the funny part about that, going all the way back around, is that bumps up against recording engineer mixing. That's funny. I just kind of made that term up out of 3 different things. Mixing for recording, like recording engineers who have to mix a full picture of something. Um,
Sure.
that mixing is more akin to some in-ear mixing,
Mhm.
and not the traditional monitor wedge mixing. And I wouldn't take that any further, because the same engineers do both, but just that I look at that and think about the fact that, like, you're really, for some artists, they want to hear their mix, like they want to hear the record back in their ears. So that's where, like I said, it kind of goes from that rough and tumble, big kick drum, big snare drum, loud vocal on stage. It's more like you're doing studio work.
Mhm.
So that workflow has come, back into it in a way.
So I think my audience would absolutely just condone me if I did not ask a sound engineer a question about this. So I'm going to ask you this.
Mm.
So at a club, at a arena, and at a stadium,
Mm.
where is the best place if you want the best sound at a concert?
I do believe that the adage of somewhere near the mix area, at front of house, um, and the reasons for that are kind of explanatory, which is that that's where the sound engineer is, and that's where they're making their decisions. Um, Again, with technology, sound coverage and quality around a facility, has gotten much better. The show is more um, balanced and more even in more of the space. But that's got to be the go-to, is that somewhere near the front of house. area. But that said, I wouldn't go huddle up to the tower. There's nowhere to sit anyway. So sitting on center means that if they're doing any kind of left right balancing or effects or spatial decisions, and now with the ability to do multiple channels, there's still kind of a place that's meant to be listened from, and that is tends to go center. And I would also consider being in the first third. Like if you divide place into thirds, I would be at the end of the first third line between the third and the second. There's a whole thing of what's called the direct and diffuse sound field, and there's an imaginary line in I guess every space where the energy coming from in front of you is equal to the energy coming from behind you. And the energy coming from behind you is all reflective. It's returning from surfaces in the building. And that's why it's harder to hear the further you go back. It's actually not that the sound system's getting quieter, it's that it's basically being defeated by its own energy returning. And so it's those things you can't tell audiences when they come to you and say, I can't hear. And you go, and what's interesting, I always mean this in a constructive way. Most people don't have the patience to have the conversation. So it just sounds like a snappy comeback, but I'll start asking, where are you sitting? Point it out at me. Like, have you walked anywhere else in the room and had any other, like, I would like to know what they're experiencing, but if you know where they are in the room, you kind of quickly have that reaction of going like, oh boy, okay. And a lot of times I'll grab an usher and be like, did you look into receiving these people? Because that is the answer at that point. There is there's no turning anything up that or down or anything that will make people I don't have the exact math, but people that are well into the diffuse sound field are kind of sunk. That's physics. Um, Outdoors better than indoors because sound just kind of carries off. Hopefully, although at Hershey it bounces off the old stadium and comes back. So that the sound out there is actually a little disconcerting at times because of that issue. Um,
We don't want to talk about Hirschberg Stadium, remember?
yeah, yeah. Um, and theater club, yeah. So then the reason is to be up front because you see those posts online. Oh, why are you setting up front if you like the sound? Um, it does really go down to like if you're up front, I prefer the self-awareness to just say I want to be up there with the show and the energy and the artist, and that is more important than whatever the experience is up there acoustically. Again, the tech gets better. We spent a lot of time trying to make that area just as interesting, but also audible, as possible. But there's some things you can't change. And so that is not the place to listen to a show. It's the place to be at the show. There's a lot going on up there, but so you have different things. You'll not find me down there. I have no interest in being there. But my favorite thing is hanging out in front of the house with my buddies who are probably working on a show and listen until I'm done and then go to catering and have some coffee till we all go out to dinner. So, spoiled, but yeah.
You got it down to a science, right?
You know what you just do after a while, you walk by enough lines and you go, man, I'm not in that line. This is great. So, yeah.
So, like, I want to know. So, you did kind of say that the outside venue is much better sound wise. What about a festival compared to like just an outside like shed?
I'm,
What is
I'm,
the sound
I'm
challenges there?
dude, you do better research than I do. Sheds have bad reputations, deservedly. They are tough, and I'm glad you hit on that because it didn't even occur to me. So an open air outdoor festival, assuming that it's being treated properly by the sound company and the people that pay the bills, should have a capable enough sound system to play the space that's there. That is just a brute force experience. The sound system has to be able to deliver the sound for as far as it goes. And they can do that with delay towers. They can do that with combinations of the main speaker system and which parts are throwing the furthest and which ones are shooting more shallow. And again, we all the tech and analysis and system controls are there anymore to make that work right. So if a show sounds really bad outside, it's one of those things that you go like, well, something isn't great, and it could be anything after that. Performance of one of the various professionals involved. It could be a bad sound design. Somebody had an idea, but it really isn't playing out. Could be the stage. The band might not be hitting it. You know, like any of those variables could pull a show down to where it's just sitting there, like a dead fish instead of really being the experience it's supposed to be. So sheds, the difficulty again, yeah, they are built for performance, but for some reason they were not built well. So they usually have weird metal roofs. They're flat and they kind of they pinch as they go. The seating rises, the roof goes back, and you get these pinch points.
Yeah.
And acoustically, that makes the diffuse sound field worse because the energy is actually getting kind of trapped towards the back
Yeah.
and compressed and creating more places for things to bounce around. Sheds have weird echoes sometimes. The sound goes back and hits a bathroom, and comes back and then the whole lawn issue because the shed usually tapers to the back
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden opens up to a huge lawn. And the main sound system can't shoot out of the shed, so they have what they call the lawn delays, which are usually installed when the facility was built and beat to death over the years, so they don't work that great, or they're just nothing like the main sound system, so the experience isn't similar. So yeah, you're walking into a system and a building that was designed for performance, but for some reason seems like they really kind of went, I'm just going to make this thing weird.
Yeah.
And so yeah, no one loves sheds.
Yeah.
I mean, we've certainly worked in our share, and even if they're neutral, for some reason it's not like one of those things. I think guys, once it gets a reputation, it kind of has it.
Mhm.
We did several shows in Baltimore at Pier 6 years ago, and that has a tented, like I was probably not vinyl, but like some kind of a
Yeah.
tented roof. Those have an interesting effect on low end that like Cirque du Soleil deals with on their tented shows. The membrane of has a bit of a reflexive energy with low frequency and just makes bass hard to deal with. I designed one show in a tent that was like one of the Cirque tents, and we had a heck of a time making the low end consistent at all in the spaces. I know Jonathan Deans, who does I think all the Cirque designs. He certainly does most of them. He hangs subwoofers up in the what's called the cupola, which is the kind of the crown top of the tent. He kind of uses it like a megaphone, so that the system is shooting symmetrically down. The bass is seeing a symmetrical path instead of playing into all these weird geometries that have membranes to them. And again, I don't know the physics behind much of the rest of that, except we had a miserable time getting bass response in that environment to be decent. You sit in one seat, you got bass, you move over, you don't. Move over that way, you have some more over here, it's a little washy. Just kind of like maddening. So
Yeah. I've been to Pier 6 Pavilion. I love that venue, but note to self, I won't see a rap concert there. Right?
Yeah, yeah. But it didn't have a bad, even getting out to the lawn, even though the tent comes down. Like I said, I didn't find it, horrific or anything like that.
Mhm.
But it is an example of like a shed style facility. The interesting thing about that was that the load in was always upstage center, and it's a shallow stage. Could have changed it by now, but so the big deal for production companies was that lighting had to be in and out of the way in under 2 hours because the rest of the show has to come in right underneath it. There's no way to come on stage to work while lighting's building their upstage trusses and stuff like that. So that was kind of one of those moments that, like, I don't know, maybe it made sense when they built it, but it definitely was the bane of a lot of production companies. I remember doing a Hall and Oates show there, and I know we all know Hall and Oates for all their hits, but I did not respect the fact until it happened. But the crowd went on their feet for 90 minutes straight, and every song was hit after hit after hit after hit, and you were just like, I feel bad that I forgot how good this was.
And
I
now they
did not.
don't talk to each other.
Yeah, I know, but I did not give that the credit it deserved going into it. I was like, oh, Hall and Oates, whatever.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be a really good show. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're consummate professionals, definitely. But yeah, they just don't like each other anymore.
Yep, yep.
So
So
I want to know, you know, again, to use a sports reference, but like, we have the Yankees of the concert industry, and that's Live Nation.
mhm.
How have they positively kind of affected your industry, and how have they kind of negatively affected your industry?
That's really interesting because we're adjacent to all that. I mean,
Right.
they're a client of ours. We send them invoices for shows and we get checks. Um, because I don't know if I would make the ultimate like judgment for it, I can say that the pieces, the moving parts of that would be that they have formalized and standardized a certain amount of the industry, which helps move from building to building and place to place and deal with kind of well, like maybe the commoditization of event production
Mhm.
and uh, and promotion. Um, so there's a certain amount of that that has kind of come along. They put a lot of money into the buildings they get involved in. So they've improved spaces that needed improving and that kind of stuff. The flip side is, of course, is they've marginalized, I don't know, a bazillion small time promoters and presenters who ran small little series in different facilities and stuff like that. Some percentage of those people joined them. The company has to be made up of, lots of little segments of promoters all over the place. Um, the downside to some of that would be that when you have a company that powerful, they get to make the rules, and uh, they're kind of a clearinghouse for pretty much, I don't know, 98% of all the major tours. I'm not trying to be in the promoter business. So, like I said, the effect on me is kind of different. And we work in the different markets that we engage with them. They have their own representatives and management for those markets. So like the New York market is different than the LA market and the LA, San Francisco, and these kind of things. So as you move through those areas, it's a different group of people, different manager. So it's not like you're ever dealing with one particular person or group of people, but um, the familiarization is there. So whether they've created more venues and more capacity for more groups to work, I wouldn't have the data for that, but that's what I would hope to be the upside is
Yeah.
that they've created more opportunity to play. Um, from a competition point of view, I don't know how you would compete with them. Um, there is they might just be a ticketing firm, AXS.
Yep.
They actually took over the box office at the Pier from Ticketmaster / Live Nation.
Oh,
Um, I haven't studied to know who's behind that and all that stuff. They clearly have resources. Um, I I don't know if that's the kind of thing where they come in for a little while and then Live Nation's able to, you know, to reassert themselves or what. So it would be nice to see a little bit of competition here and there. I mean, AEG's decent sized, but they're not as big as they are. So like it'd be nice to see some variety. At the same time, it's not the way of the world. Everything seems to be going the other way. Claire has bought up, the number two, three, four, five competitor to them. There's nobody that has the resources they do and the touch that they have. We'll see whether that's for good or bad. Companies like me, we keep a half an eye on that because that they breathe in the wrong direction and we can get blown over by it. So um, you know I have to give space to the idea that major corporations who've been able to really take over large pieces of the industry has to have knocked over some people's dreams. I certainly don't want mine to be knocked over, but at the same time, that's not a box I get to check. So
yeah.
we've strived to kind of build relevance in our solutions and how we approach things
Yeah.
and the relationships to people. Um, we say every business is a people business, and that's how we treat it. But that's kind of an ongoing thing for us. We can't compete, and nor can a small promoter compete with their biggest competitor on their playing field. It's not possible. But I would like to think that there's still room for everybody to do what they do. That would be my preference. This sounds like a semi-diplomatic way of doing the usual, like that this is great, that stinks, or whatever. But I don't have the visibility into what the end of the day effect would be. Um, they certainly did an amount of good over time with putting some money into some things like, they did some help during COVID for crewing. No amount of help I think would have, really did enough, but they certainly were trying to be at least somewhere in there. Um, the fact that they engage with the union, I mean, as Live Nation as a company, I believe is not just pro union, but I believe they have kind of a generalized contract with IATSE. Um,
Okay.
and that's again, that's like a professional acknowledgement to me that they understand that that is a piece of what we all do.
You're
And
important.
yeah, and not just going like, nope, we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Uh, and regardless, I have no flags in my office here, but I would say that, um, I say to anybody that I work with whenever we do shows where you might have a couple of new technicians show up, maybe they're like New York guys who work in the club scene. They're going to usually have a bit of a salty opinion about the IA, mostly because it's a club they're not in, but also they've probably had experience around them or with them, and they don't kind of understand all the draconian rules and things like that. But just like the car industry or any of the other ones that once had very powerful unions involved, I just maintain that the only way that anyone makes a dime being a stagehand anymore is because of the union's involvement in the business at all, because they're one of the last things that is able to set a rule or set an expectation, and actually get it followed through with. So the idea that there's a meal break or possible overtime or anything like that, I fully believe is because the union's around. And it doesn't mean you have to work in their job site. It's just that is a thing that exists, and you can kind of turn your appeal to it. And then there's always kind of the perpetual, um, you know, thing where every non-union crew can turn to the union and say we'd like to unionize. And I think, I want to say, I mean, I guess it is a threat in a way, but the idea that your crew could unionize is something you'd prefer to keep them happy at the risk of going down that road too. So we have always worked well alongside the union. My experience doing theatrical tours, I was a union member. I still have my card out of my home local because I thought that was important. I haven't worked under it in 20 years, but I still send my dues because it's a tough group to get into. But I've taught my guys how to work with the union, um, and I've kind of they've even got to witness that kind of system where you show up in a venue, you're respectful, defer to them on things, enlist them in what you're doing.
Sure.
And most of the time, you guys will be fast friends by the time you all go out the door. And every time you show up in that building again, they've got you, down. I mean, our guys at the pier in New York, I can text them in the morning and say, hey, just looked at the sheet for today. We're not on site yet because they usually call them first because they'll be tipping trucks and stuff. And they'll bring our consoles up from storage, and they'll do a bunch of stuff for us before we even get there. And they seem happy. Like it's not just they're happy to do it. It's like they kind of want to be enlisted to do that stuff.
Mhm.
So they're just like I said. It's like I wouldn't do it differently. Um, so I'm a fan of that kind of thing. And I guess that's germane to the conversation of Live Nation and even like I said, the Claire Global kind of thing where you've got some really big shops that can put a lot of pressure if they really feel like it. I mean, at least there's something on the other side that kind of can
Yeah.
stand up and
So we, kind of get into the business in the early 90s. What do we do then from the 90s until we start the company in 2005? Is the work-life balance there, or are we just kind of like balls to the wall, or what are we
work life balance is a myth. Um, so I was definitely pretty just laser focused in this thing. Um, and that's I'm not advocating for that or whatever. It's just a statement of fact. So um, if I do it chronologically, I toured regularly and did not necessarily have a home address up until 1999 because I didn't need one. If I was off for a little bit, I stayed with friends or went up to my folks or whatever. In '99, I actually got a place in Hummelstown, um, just like a townhouse with a couple of friends of mine who did similar kinds of things. So we were not usually all around at one time. Um, so starting in '99 was when I started withdrawing from full-time touring, like living on the road out of my work box kind of thing, and started picking up work that from people that I had met over time. So um, you meet some people in St. Louis, you meet people here, you meet people there. They do certain work. Hey, it'd be cool if you could work on this. Yeah, call me next time, kind of thing. So I started to scatter my kind of regular work that I used to get with taking a month or two off and doing some freelance things, um, which kind of out of necessity, you start to amass some equipment here and there. Then somebody asks you to do a job on your own, but you don't have anybody to help, so you grab a couple friends and they do some stuff. And I'm not gonna. I mean, I'm not. I'll be happy to go back, but fast forwarding, it basically goes from there until I'm skipping a couple of big things, but like '05 is when I went. I think I've started a company because I pay people now and I have trucks and loading docks. And just '05 was when we incorporated the business and
Sure.
started formal payroll and all that kind of stuff. And it started treating it as a company. So basically it's kind of that slide, that kind of long slide from '99 to '05 through doing my events on my own, picking up a few things here and there. We started doing shows at Whitaker Center as like their out of house sound company.
Mhm.
And that's one of the places we kind of bought some of our first equipment to work in that space, the right kind of mixing boards and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Worked out of two storage units over by, um, I don't think it's Swatera Township, but over where the Walmart is, which is actually near where my shop is. But two of those orange storage units, we had all our equipment in, renting U-Haul trucks and all that stuff. So, they did that whole game for quite a while, until, like I said, it just was like, well, I think I have a business here.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a little bit difficult to detangle yourself from the touring and then some regular work. Like I did work with a few artists, not on retainer, but might as well have been. And they expect you to go to be at the shows that they book you for. And so that took a lot of dancing to get around some of those things. And I don't mean dancing as in figure out how to not do what I'm supposed to, but
Right.
just manage the people that got you where you were while taking advantage of new opportunities, not letting everybody down, figuring
Sure.
just that stuff. I don't think I'd want to do again. It wasn't that much fun. Um, but that's also a growth thing. So I handed a lot of jobs that I had to other people as time went on, whether it was bring somebody along and kind of get them acclimated or pass off a project to somebody who you had reasonable faith who would take care of it. Um, and did this pretty cool show called Spirit, which this might all link up, but in '99, the last tour I did came out of what used to be the PBS Pledge Break specials, which they don't do anymore. But
Okay.
back in the day, they used to raise money doing their pledge break stuff, but they would tape a show that would kind of air as the attraction.
Right.
Probably one of the most famous would be Riverdance, but Stomp was also one of those. Um, and there was a bunch of symphony stuff. Yanni at the Acropolis was one. Um, uh, I worked on one that never saw the light of day that was in Romania. That was a Romanian pan flute player named Damien, and a big symphony we did in front of Ceausescu's palace. Don't think that ever aired. Um, it was problematic just from an execution point of view. It almost was more of a vanity project than anything else, but the scale was gigantic. I mean, they flew us all from the U.S. to Romania for 2 weeks, and then brought all production in from France and Germany. I mean, it was a big lift, but like I said, I don't think it ever aired. But so there was a show called Spirit, and it was filmed in Green Bay at the theater at the college university there, and it was basically, if you had to call it anything, it was the Native American Cirque du Soleil. So it was Native American company, um, and a story that was written by Peter Buffett, who's one of Warren Buffett's three kids, who is a musician and wrote a lot of new age stuff. Wrote some of the early MTV jingles, like the bumpers that they would come out to commercial and back from. So a lot of writing and composing and stuff like that. So he worked on Dances with Wolves with Kevin Costner, and he wrote the most famous number he wrote was the fire dance scene. So out of that, he met a lot of Native American um, uh, performers and tribes people, and got very interested in the storyline of all those things. And so that turned into the show. And I did not work on the show in '99. I saw the special, but
Okay.
when I came off the road from one of my last tours, I was in the shop at Mask, which is another sound company in New York City, and they were looking for someone to mix this show called Spirit. And it came around to me, and I'm working on something in the shop, and they're like, "Hey, you want to mix this show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it looks cool." So I went out and mixed the show. So they did a tour of it. It only ran, I think we ran for 2.5 months. And the the thing that plagued this show was it lived up to the phrase um, critical success, commercial failure, because it was a great show, but it was completely original. And so you can't just run through a whole bunch of cities because you built no market for it. So the best you get is curious ticket buyers, or a lot of times you'd go into a city and you'd open to a big house, because a lot of times the first night people come out and a lot of season ticket holders come. But
Sure.
then during the week, not good houses at all. And then by the weekend, you're doing good business and now you're leaving. And so that show ran and closed. And then it stayed like that until '03. And Peter Buffett called me because we had spent a lot of time commiserating about even the process, because he was new to the kind of theatrical way of doing things. And that's the heart of the show, even though it came out of a TV show. They brought in all theatrical designers to work on it. So he didn't like that it was kind of very strict and very stiff. And
Sure.
he wanted to be more creative, and he'd come to me with ideas. And I'm like, Peter, I'm the sound engineer. I'm not the sound designer. I can't make changes on the fly without getting in trouble with the sound designer. Um, so the cool thing was I got a call in '03, and he's like, "Hey, we're putting the band back together." And I was like, "What?" And so he's like, "I got this idea. We're going to do the show again, but it's going to tour intense like Cirque." And I was like, "Good Lord." So I mean, I was like, "Sign me up." So I was involved right at the beginning in the development of what turned into the touring show. We had 28 tractor trailers touring this tented show with, just like Cirque. I mean, we carried everything with us. We carried our own bathrooms, and all that stuff. And it played 2 years. It played a year closed, and then got opened for one more year, but fell to the same fate, which was this thing was incredibly expensive to move, let alone just operate, and it cost a ton of money to build in the first place. And there was no math that ever worked for the show to be anywhere. There was no, you could never sell enough seats to pay any of it back, nor to keep it running past whatever fund, whatever money they had kind of put into it. So it was really cool to work on. I did the sound design for that. Um, and we did a full surround mix, kind of like some of the new immersive things that you see now. Like we did a 7.1 audio mix for the show. It was very compelling. Actually, one night in Milwaukee, a guy comes walking up to the mixing board after the show is over, and I recognize him, and I'm like, "Oh crap!" And the guy comes up to me, and it's Alan Parsons, and he comes up and he looks at. I'm like, I'm waiting for him to. I don't know what he's going to ask me, but I'm like, crap. And he sticks out his hand and he goes, "Fantastic sound, man, fantastic." And I was like, like, can you sign something? This is amazing.
Yeah.
So he chit chatted for a minute, and then he kind of had to roll along. But I was like, Alan Parsons told me the sound was good. I think that's going to work. So pretty awesome. But Peter
Yeah.
and I still keep in touch a little bit. He's like, he'll never do that again. He's scarred. We're all scarred from it, but it's like, it's kind of funny that idea is done and dusted. Nobody's going to pick it back up,
Yeah.
but it was cool.
Huh.
It exists on video somewhere, but anyway.
So I don't want to know the bands or artists that you toured with because, like you said, that's not important. But I do want to know, like, in that time frame where you were doing this t constant touring,
Mhm.
when you saw a city on like that tour, was there a city or two that got you excited when you're like, "Oh, I love this city," or because you went to that city, you were like, "Oh man, every time I come back, I'm gonna love it." Like, did you have that experience with any city or two?
I've gotten the biggest kick. You got the best questions. I got the biggest kick out of what I used to say. Somebody else pays me to travel. And the reason for that was, and again, this is my own commentary. Like few people agree with all of my assessments of the places I've been. But one, I would never have gone to most of these areas, either whether I wanted to or not, or just would never have happened. So the experience of being able to travel in that way is pretty awesome. As a side note, and I won't get too distracted, I don't understand all the grumpy touring people. They are, as a not as a rule, but almost just generally kind of grumpy. And I don't know. It's a thing that we struggle with. We talk about in the shop every once in a while. And I've been like, man, like you got it pretty good. I'm not really, not really sure what the catch is here. Maybe not everything's perfect every day, but come on. So uh, the region of North America I like the most is the Pacific Northwest. So Seattle, Vancouver, and Portland have been like one of those places that I'm like, this feels like home to me. Now, shockingly, it's the same latitude, longitude. I'm bad at these. Longitude as basically upstate New York where I grew up. Um,
Latitude, latitude.
there you
Yeah.
go.
Yep.
So the lush, like green, it's lush.
Mhm.
Um, the traffic is horrendous around Seattle. I've been back many times, but if you don't let that get you, again, it's just between the all the waterways and inlets, and I got to fly a seaplane out there one time, which was awesome. So I like that part of the country, and I always said that would be my impulse move if I ever just said I'm moving.
Okay.
Not it's not realistic, but that's what I have to say. Um, I through touring, I made my peace with LA, which is kind of crazy because it's generally a hateful place. The traffic will ruin everything for you. But I closed a tour there at the Pantages, and we weren't. There was no reason to run home. And a couple people on the tour were from Burbank, and so we all just hung out after the tour for a couple weeks. And I learned how to get around without always getting on the highway. And so I found some things to do that were interesting. And there's a lot of things to do there. The idea of getting around it is the deterrent. So being able to kind of get around out there just altered that enough to where I don't dread heading that way. Um, I'm good on Florida. Like so, the funny part is living on the East Coast. You kind of get most of the East Coast in anyway,
Yeah.
but that's a bummer. I don't think there's a lot of redeeming quality to that. Um, Canada as a place is kind of fun, whether it's the east or the west side of it. It's just different enough and culturally different enough that's kind of fun.
Mhm.
I've been to Cuba um, for the jazz festival there, and that is an experience. I don't need to do any more of it, but just being there and seeing it all and taking it in was pretty crazy. I've also found I don't really care about much of the islands, Caribbean, even Hawaii. Like I said, Hawaii is Miami Beach, but with a 5 hour plane ride. So that's just me being kind of grumpy, but I don't need that stuff really. Um, Found I like Vegas, not for the obvious reasons. Like I don't really gamble, or at least I don't think $100 is gambling, but also just got there enough that I started to understand what there was to do there, and I think that's the biggest thing is being in a town for a minute and kind of going like, okay, I see, I like this over here. This is kind of nice. I might come back. San Antonio with the Riverwalk. I
Yeah.
thought the Riverwalk is just delightful. I saw more of the place, but all I really cared about was just the idea that you could hop out on the Riverwalk and wander off to whatever you were up to.
Some
Um,
great Mexican on the Riverwalk.
yes,
Great
yes.
Tex-Mex. Yeah.
Yep. Um, weird things like that. San Diego was always cool. Whenever I was there, I'd go to Mission Beach, rent jet skis, and ride around the little waterway there. Old Town was cool. Gaslamp District. So yeah, like Dallas is a bummer city as far as just oppressively, flat and hot. But Deep Ellum's kind of weird. It's a little cultural kind of vibe there. Um, if you don't mind walking around the heat, you can go see all the World's Fair stuff or what's left over there. I did some shows in music hall there, so that was right in the middle of it. So it's kind of interesting. My list of places that are kind of set, like really come back to me is kind of short, but I'm glad that someone else paid me to go to all these places because the places I don't need to return to is it's a bit of a list. But I've done a good amount of Europe. I've done Romania is as far eastern. Romania and Poland are for this east I've gone. Anywhere in Europe is usually just eye opening because if you haven't been there, you haven't been there. So Norway stands out. Um, I don't remember the city. I've only been there once, but we played Norway where they don't have taxis. They have ferries. Like the ferries come and go as fast as taxis do. Um, we did a concert in an old fish market. It was kind of wild. Um, just very cool. Very nice. Like everything's scenic because the mountains are so high. Like just you're in the scenery. There, even getting to and from. So that was pretty spectacular. Um, for some reason, I like Germany in general. I seem to enjoy the mechanics of it. Like, there's a very like there's a right and a wrong way to do everything. I like that, and I like the engineering part of it. There's
Yeah.
all the solutions there are always very thought out. So there's something there that I kind of dig. And I was in Japan for 6 weeks, and that again there's enough of a cultural difference there, and I do tend to be a creature of comfort, so don't love tackling language differences. Some people really enjoy it, like they'll go anywhere and just immerse and figure out how to communicate, and I'm never less happy than when I can't communicate. So I really enjoyed being there, but we also had interpreters for every department. So like audio had an interpreter. We also had a Japanese counterpart. So we had a Japanese sound engineer with us as a department. So moving from city to city, they really almost stepped in to our role as leadership, and we were along for the ride kind of thing. So from that point of view, it was just awesome to be in Japan, and see the different cities there. But
Is
again, I don't think I'd buy a ticket and run back.
is it easy to get around Japan? Because I know in Europe it's so easy to get around, but is it easy to get
Yeah,
around in Japan?
they've got their train system, and
Okay.
we did couple runs by buses, and then the rest were train. Once we landed in Sapporo, because we flew all the equipment over in a cargo 747, and then we got four tractor trailers in 747, and they still had room to put horses and some other stuff from like another customer that was taking stuff over. So that was kind of wild. Um, but yeah, once we landed in Sapporo, everything went by truck. And like I said, we were either buses or I think we flew one time. I think there was a water crossing somewhere, but yeah, the trains and everything is very quick. And getting around the cities, I remember if you stood at the subway map too long and you clearly didn't look like you lived there, somebody would come up and speak English to you and start like, where are you going? So it had a friendliness to it that was kind of nice. Um, anything could change, but it was pretty chill. So
Yeah.
that was a nice experience. You could kind of file away. Again, I'm not like I said, I don't know if I'm gonna run over there by myself, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So 2005, we start the company. How soon, was it within the first year? Was it within the first 5 years? Did we have our first kind of like financial setback or financial difficulty?
The '08 economy was my first financial hit, and was not prepared for it. And I spent the next 2 years like digging out of it. So by the time that the business was formalized, like we were already moving. And I use we a lot. I mean, I'm the one owner. I don't have any partners, so I think the we is just me reflecting the communal aspect of some of the efforts. Um, so as soon as we could afford to buy anything, get terms with manufacturers and stuff, we were adding the equipment we needed to do things. For that show Spirit that we ended up doing, I got my first money from a bank. I got an SBA loan for like 280,000 or something to buy some of the equipment, and so it was really focused on growth. And I don't think I had a reason to think that it wasn't going to just kind of do that as we rolled along. Um, and when I don't remember the months because I like when I go through the timeline on COVID, it's a little more clear. But in the '08 economy, I know we were coming up into December at some point, so it must have been the fall. And we just saw the work starting to drop out of the calendar. You know, like we weren't building work, we were losing it. And at that point, I just was looking at like we were going that way with money, and all of a sudden the wall's coming back this way. So it didn't take a long time to go. I mean, this is only going to end one way at this point in time. Um, so we approached the crew because I'd also done a lot of hiring. I had 12 people back then, and basically was like, well, this stuff's grinding to a halt, and we're going to have to like roll up the carpet for a while. Um, I I basically said, you know, whenever this lets up, we'll get back to it, but I can't float the group, you know, while this happens. Um, so I before, laid off four of the new hires, and um, you know, basically called the people we owed money to and said, well, I mean, I'll get you money someday, but not today. And kind of went into just like a very abbreviated version of the business. I mean, we still operated a bit, but we couldn't work at the level that we had started at.
Right.
Um, I actually, while we were stopped, I put two of the guys through trucking school because we've always had to deal with the commercial driving aspect of what we do. And I was like, you know, that's a great investment, and they'll come back and, you know, I'll have drivers. So we did do that, and we kept in touch over the process. And I forget how many months we were rolled up. It wasn't super long. Probably in the spring we started getting back to it.
Sure.
And we brought everybody back that wanted to come back. Two of the people didn't, but we got back to work. The problem is we had a lot of new equipment that needed to be paid for, and you know the banks at that point wouldn't give any money to anybody. You can certainly read about all that in various articles and documentaries about like the SBA was instructed to give money to businesses and they didn't. And I can tell you firsthand that is absolutely the case. I met with my bank, but also four other banks just looking to like soften the blow for us and get us moving forward. And everybody's like, "Oh, business looks pretty good. You know, you guys made some money. Looks like you're in a good place. Well, can we get some money? No." So that steeled me to the idea that if I was gonna have to bail myself out, I wasn't gonna be running back to those banks again because now I did it.
It's on
So
your own.
yep. So we bailed out over about 2 years. Like the key there is working with your manufacturers. Like, you know, we bought some gear on terms, um, and they got paid back very slowly. But the worst thing you can do is not talk to them, because everybody knows that everybody's having trouble. But it was just like, let's be realistic and not do anything else. So we got out of it, and it didn't cause any pain, any like prolonged pain. But we grew, we grow at almost 12% a year in general. Like if you go back to like any kind of growth graphs, and that's based on gross income, not profit, but just I look at that as business volume and just say like, okay, here's how much hay we made this year somehow. So we've almost stuck to that number. When we started in business, we were 12% a year, uh, and then basically in '08 we get knocked down, but then we grow back out of it 12% a year,
Yeah.
um, all the way up to COVID, and then we had our biggest year going into COVID. But I'll tell you what, as soon as I started hearing about what was going on in China, I had that inkling that here we go again. And we had the shop. I got on the phone with our client and we, as polite, as respectfully as we could, said, you have shows in our calendar right now. There's this thing happening that may or may not have an impact. And at this point, we're going to have to ask you guys to make a deposit on your jobs, because if we have to stay at the ready for these jobs, we can't do that and then not have them happen. I've got to make a pretty dramatic
Sure.
decision.
Yeah.
And most people played, I mean, everybody agreed, but you ran into various opinions. Some people said, oh, this has happened before, it's not going to be a big deal. Other people were like, oh, I get it, totally, don't worry about it. We had to do it anyway. So it was the most forceful I've been about a negative business
Sure.
aspect, of backing away. But I mean, we'll keep the job. I just need you to do something that says we're going to try to do the job.
Yeah.
And what do you know? None of those jobs happened. But we were able to close very quickly. So we closed the shop, put everybody on unemployment, called the bank, the insurance company, the landlord. I might be missing one other thing, and said, we can address these issues now or later, but you know,
Yeah.
there's going to be financial things here. Our landlord was awesome. And we found a way to kind of just work through the process, whether it was, getting, um, accounts payable building up over some time to make rent, and then do, we got a county grant at one point in time. We just signed that straight over to the landlord and everything. So, we got through that, and that was good. Insurance company was fairly responsive, and what they ended up doing was we did an early audit of our insurance for that year. Since we weren't going to have significant business volume, why wait till the end of the year to audit your premium?
Sure.
So we audited it based on estimation, and then they refunded us a substantial amount of our premium. We weren't going to carry insurance if we're not running, or we'd carry all the insurance if we're not running. That
Right.
worked out well. Banks were banks, everybody gave the 90-day interest deferred thing, and then,
Yeah.
but then they got right back to it. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so we came out we came out in a good position, because I basically said, we got to close. And then when they said, what do we do when we get open? Or how about these events, these, um, concerts at the baseball parks or the drive-ins and that thing? And I said, I just kind of sat on it for a minute, and said, I don't think that's a business model. Like, I get it for something to do and maybe pay, a few bucks to here and there. I said, I don't see it. So we opted to stay closed and not burn money, because it costs money to operate. Like, we cost money sitting still. Um, and that has to be offset by work. So, by not trying to kind of fight through the early stages of anything, we were able to open up in a pretty good position. So the full calendar year after COVID, that was our next biggest year ever. So, it was kind of bookended pretty powerfully. But those are the two biggest blips on our radar screen. We're looking at something right now. I mean, we're down for this year. The first quarter was not great. Second quarter is decent. It's on par, which is good. I mean, spring is the busiest month for us. So this rest of this summer is to be determined. In the fall, there's certainly signs that don't point in a super great direction. Um, Now that I've managed two crises, I will apply some of those lessons moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, like, it's kind of weird, but like I said, the '08 thing helped me with COVID, and not trying to swim upstream when you're doing it's not a good idea. Um, and so I don't know. We'll see what I have to do this time, but you know,
Yeah, my fear is just that, yeah, like just again, like just with everything, like cost is going to cause, you know, like the people are just not going to be able to go to concerts. They just can't afford, you know,
yeah,
that $200 concert, once a month.
yeah. Oh, and we're seeing the corporate work whittle away, because corporations are
Yeah.
the level I mean, you can't run a business with a high degree of uncertainty. It's you have to. I mean, I have to say it's that simple. whether someone would agree or not.
Yeah.
But I can just tell you that you can't make decisions when you don't know what the heck's going on, because your investments are not moment to moment. They're long-term moves. Hiring somebody is a long-term commitment.
Mhm.
I keep saying uh, to friends of mine when we talk about this stuff that I'm not a landscape company. We're not supposed to have seasonal help. I have full-time employees because I need to retain the knowledge base and the experience. So we're not going to play the game of, work dries up, we get rid of the thing that costs money, which are people. Um, that's incredibly old-fashioned, which is not necessarily the thing that's going to win any points in the stock market. But that's just not the game I was trying to play. So we will see.
So, what do you feel AI is going to do positively and negatively to your industry?
If I had to take the middle of the road on it, kind of trying to aggregate some of the things that people are talking about, I do fall into the camp where AI, as it's presented and advertised now, is not really what we believe AI is when we watch movies. But it is still a technology that has an impact, and that someday might be the thing that everybody's wondering about. But in the short term, like, I fall in the camp of like, yeah, it's still some time. It's not going to be making our breakfast for us, in the fall. But we're seeing the tools come out here and there that have what's considered AI technology in it. Going right back to the thing I just said, you could argue that a lot of things are AI. The Mr. Paperclip that used to pop up in the
Sure.
office. Hey, it looks like you're writing a thing. Do you want to do this? They didn't call it AI, or maybe they did, and I wasn't paying attention. But what that thing was back then. So when a new plugin comes out and it has an AI feature, the hard thing to say is, well, is this a feature no matter what it's called, or is it the AI that we all have dreams about? So um, there's there's some mastering plugins for recording. You send your file in, it does a bunch of stuff to it and kicks it back out.
Mhm.
There's one that makes stems out of music, that you're seeing kind of used a little bit. I had a lunch meeting Saturday with actually my uncle and his wife Ulrika, who are both audio engineers, and they were talking about work they've done where being able to resurrect an instrument track that had too much leakage in it, they were able to run through is certain tool set to decide whether it was good enough or not. So there's where we're going to see a little bit of this kind of pop up
Mhm.
and come into the workflow a little bit. Where AI starts taking out pieces of what we all do is the big question mark. I mean, in theory, mixing decisions could be made by an algorithm somehow, but I would say that's as soon as all the books are written and all the music's made by AI, then we worry about who's mixing the music. So if I had to be calm about it, we're going to see the tools come in. We'll see the name used. There may be some things like there may be some plugins that do some crazy stuff until the person at the console is replaced, because obviously that stuff comes in there somewhere. Um, Not just the ability to mix music, but to capture it. As soon as you have a thing that can parse in real time
Mhm.
all the acoustical impulses in a space, you could have a world free of feedback, acoustical anomalies, and everything. Well, the path from that to the other is hard to call. So you can kind of see the places where it fits. But the place where technology continues to chip away at traditional um, approaches and equipment is in the accessibility of the stuff. The mixing boards you can buy today for $2,500 make the board I bought for $2,500 when I first started a doorstop, not even a really good one. And everything in the world is in that device. I mean, you can do all your effects. You can do everything from it. Is it the most reliable? Maybe, maybe not. Is it does it sound the best? Maybe. Like there's reasons why there's mixing boards that cost $200,000, and there's reasons why there's some that cost 2,500. So that gap is still there, but we see more tours with more engineers, usually younger ones, carrying equipment that we would not have considered carrying on shows, but it's accessible and it's powerful, and the desire to have your own stuff, your own tools, um, is very strong. And if you're a tour accountant, you're very happy to spend 10 grand on a little touring package and never having to rent anything from anybody.
Sure.
Um, so my prediction, if I had one, was that's the sector that you're going to see the most impact in any kind of intelligent slash automated, workflows, um, as it trickles up to anything in the pro space. Um, Only because pro still has a bit of an artisanal
Yeah.
angle to it,
Yeah.
but but what will catch up first? That or the desire of the younger engineers to work on things that they have experience with.
Mhm.
That's the change that we've actually witnessed. Is certainly after my generation began in the business. I don't know where the break point is exactly, but we all grew up on the pro brands and the pro names, and everyone aspired to the big 8 foot long mixing board and the big heavy speakers and the big amplifier. Like you wanted to be part of all that stuff, and that's what came with it. And so everybody, you never thought twice that a mixing board didn't cost $80,000. Um, I mean, in my shop, like we don't have $10,000 mixing boards. Like they all go up from there,
Yeah.
and that's the cost of doing business. It's the tool you have to have. It's the thing that everybody expects. We have them in multiples. It's a little bit eye watering sometimes. They're incredible pieces of equipment. Um, the question mark is how long does that remain such, or will they become irrelevant? And what we're seeing is, let's say 10 years ago, you might look at a rider and it might say, I will only accept the following mixing boards. And it says, you know, Avid, Digico, Yamaha, no Allen and Heath, no name mixers, no Mackie, no Behringer, no.
Yeah.
Well, that is exactly not how it's going at the moment. People are showing up with those other three brands, and the brands have done a good job of developing their technology. Allen Heath has leaned into this whole space. They were not very relevant when they built their analog boards. Um, People would say, "I don't want one on my show. I want one of these other ones."
Yeah.
And now it's an in-demand console, but at a price point that everybody can buy. So if you've got younger engineers who are not as tribal about their gear as they used to be, and it's really affordable, plus that do-it-yourself kind of gig economy spirit in the younger crew, the future of like pro expensive audio is question mark. Again, I'm not here to predict anything that way, but
Right.
we're seeing more of that than we're not. So at the highest levels, it's still all the big crazy gear. Um, but at what point does that kind of kick over? Um, One of the more famous guys that I could see as an example is Drew Thornton, who mixes Billie Eilish. He was actually he stuck out to everybody because he was touring with her on an Allen Heath console, and he continued using it throughout her big as she got into big touring, and that caused people to go, "Wow, what's up with this?" Like it wasn't like, "What is that guy doing?" It was, "Well, he uses that, and he mixes Billie Eilish." Now the reasons for all that are whatever they are. That was the board they had when they started, and he kept using it, or whatever it be. But the funny part is that that by itself made and carrying an Allen Heath console an acceptable thing. I'm not saying he took the hill, but he certainly stood out very early as being one of the people that was kind of broke that level, as going, "This is my desk. I'm using it."
Yeah, that's crazy. So I want to know for you as a sound engineer, What is the ideal way for you to listen to music? Is it in the car? Is it headphones? Is it with a nice pair of speakers in your living room? Like,
I'm,
what
I'm
is it for you?
still I'm still a nut for speakers. And again, that goes back to I actually still have the first pair of speakers I went and listened to in a store repeatedly. Like I went back so many times they probably would have wanted to throw me out, but I bought them. They're Paradigm 3 SEs, which are not made anymore, of course. They're in my office at work. I've never blown them up, but they survived college, and they're just two way. They're just bookshelf two ways. But I picked them out. I still like the sound of them. They're not super bright. It's a soft dome tweeter. It's not a metal dome tweeter, and it's not a compression driver or anything else. But that's what I liked about it. So I like picking speakers and listening to them. Um, that's another funny conversation I got into on Saturday with my uncle, also with some of the acoustic designers at EAW. Is when we were all younger, we wanted speakers because they were, big and boxy and looked interesting. And you bought them, and maybe they sounded okay, maybe they didn't. And you probably blew them up 10 times, and most people don't have the ones they started with. So at work, the the requirements that we have for our speakers are pretty over the top. Like they have to deliver so much output to a very predictable way without blowing up or failing by getting rained on. Um, and we require linearity through the whole system. So like there's no holes in the frequency response. And in the crossover points, we want them to be phase accurate. All this tweaking and a ton of DSP to make that happen anymore. Back when none of that existed, I kind of recently just called speaker building voodoo because you got a big wooden cabinet, you cut holes in it, you stick drivers inside, you kind of see what works, see what doesn't, change the driver to another one. If you take the crossovers out of your home speakers, they're very simple, a capacitor or two and a coil. They're not very high tech. Worst thing I ever did to myself on my home system as an adult was I was the resurgence of vinyl. I finally got around to grabbing a turntable and putting it in my living room system and grabbed a couple old LPs that I had laying around and threw one on to see what it was. And wow, did it not sound very good. So I kind of went back through, looked at the turntable and the setup on it and stylus, made a couple checks, made sure that, the preamp was appropriately the moving magnet and not the coil and all that stuff. I didn't really get anywhere with it. So then it got me spooked about, well, what else is going on here? So I brought home from work an audio analyzer piece of software called Smart, and we use that to check everything. We when we go into a new space, we use Smart to tune the sound system. When we're checking speakers at work, it shows you phase relationships, frequency response, and all that kind of stuff. So I decided to measure my speakers here at the house because maybe something's not right. Maybe the tweeters are a little bit injured because that can happen where you don't actually ruin a driver completely, you just damage it. Well, the speakers were not broken, but I should never have looked at the phase and frequency response of these speakers because it was all over the map. It would be rejected if it was a professional loudspeaker. But when you back up and look at it, it's not. There's no fancy crossover system. There's no DSP. There's nothing to make it do what our Pro Gear does.
Right.
It's not expected to. And it kind of made me re-embrace the idea that for home audio, you buy speakers that you like. For pro audio, you buy speakers you can work on. And those are two pretty different things.
Sure.
So it's just kind of a recent kind of thing I've been sitting on because I'm going like, it really is taste. It is like you have to listen. And if it sounds good to you, that's what you're going to run with. Don't stick it on an analyzer. Don't see what it is that you're not getting. You're not going to want to know. But it just comes down to what you like to hear. So it turns out, because there's speakers all over my house. I have an Atmos theater downstairs in the basement. I have 7.1 in the living room, and those are all Paradigm systems. It was a brand I like. And then I've got like a pair of Kefs in my office here that I enjoy listening to. And that's kind of the house. And then at work, we have a studio. It's got studio monitors laying all over the place. There's some in a pile in the corner. I'll listen to the Myers today. I'll listen to JBLs today. I'll listen to PMCs today. So, so there's a reason why you might not like a certain speaker. I don't like my living room speakers for music. They sound fine in 7.1, movies and all that stuff. They're totally good. Put music on them. I don't like them. I could think of 100 reasons why, but at least I don't have to obsess over it anymore.
That's so funny. So like what are your top three bands that you like, or do you have a top three?
Um, you know what? It's funny because I often reflect. I can either do the "What am I listening to right now" game,
Sure. Yeah.
or like all time. And all time's so hard because you might put something down for a while and then you pick it back up and you're like, I remember how good this was, or I don't remember how bad that was. Um, and I'll dip in and out of things that are just complete one-off, but I'm obsessively listening to it for a while.
Sure.
Even my tuning tracks will ebb and flow a bit. Um, you get tired of listening to a certain one after a while, or you start questioning whether it's actually valid. Like, what I thought I was getting out of this, I don't know if I'm getting. But that said, um, I listened. I like Tears for Fears is pretty great, and every time they make anything, I'm good.
The new
And
album is fantastic.
the new one is
So
great.
good.
I saw them in Vegas
Oh, nice.
on their last run, and actually they're going to go. They're doing September, October again, and like I can assure you, if you haven't picked up on this, I will not go to my way to see many concerts. I will go to Vegas to see Tears for Fears. Just you can't beat that stuff. So them, we're good on that. Those guys are great. Um, it turns out there's a lot of audio engineers that have this phrase or this list that I just thought I kind of came up with, which is I had the freebies. I had the people that I would mix for free, mostly because I knew that I would never get to mix them. But Garbage is one. Tears for Fears is one. Tori Amos is one, but probably in her early to mid career.
Sure.
Certainly when she did her live album, uh, went right out of my head, but she had a 2 disc live album that was really good.
Mhm.
Um, and then Sting, so if you had to go with like what I might reach to in any particular day, that stuff would kind of fall into it.
Yeah.
But I enjoy Rammstein. I really liked the live concert thing they had on Amazon because it's just ridiculous. Trying to set the keyboard player on fire with a flamethrower. I don't know. I can't claim that isn't the most entertaining thing. Um, uh,
Well, you
like
said you like Germany, right?
dude, I know that's the funny thing. I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg there, um, but listen to a good amount of jazz. My uncle does this really high fidelity, like kind of super realistic stuff. He does a lot of immersive mixing for jazz. That's all ear candy. We were trying to get this done in July, but usually once or twice a year we'll have him out and some other people, and we'll do a little like mini con at our work. We'll build a listening area in one of the presentation rooms, and they'll bring out material that they've made recently and go through basically like a show and tell and talk about how they made certain recordings and that kind of stuff. And
That's
it's really fun for audiophiles or just anybody who likes music. So most of his stuff is very listenable from just the I have no idea how to make something sound that good. And then when he explains it, it's nuts and bolts, proper technique. It's just funny because everyone's like, "What's the box you use? What's the widget? What's the thing?" No, it's very good mics, very good mic preamps, good ears, good technique. Be a little creative here and there. So it's pretty incredible. Um, uh, Interestingly, weird EDM tracks drop into my list all the time.
good.
Um, we had Dead Mouse first or second season at the Pier, and I mean I was just ambivalent towards it. But after his one of the live shows, and then finding out that he's a big analog synth fan, and again one of those kind of neat things to learn about. Analog synths distort differently than digital ones. Digital ones, that you have the whole Nyquist frequency, which is the hard shelf cutoff that digital equipment has to have. The
Okay.
analog doesn't, and it gives a little bit of a cushier sound to something if you're paying that much attention. And it started to set aside like kind of his tracks to some other things, and so I kind of dug that a little bit. So that's like a rabbit hole you'll go down every once in a while because you're just like, oh, I like this, and why do I like it, and then kind of roll along from there.
Yeah.
So
There's a documentary on Hulu right now about a band that I was really into that has really kind of not really done anything in a while. Are you familiar with the band Failure?
no, I love learning about new bands though.
So they were big. They were out of Los Angeles, early '90s. But like Maynard from Tool is a huge fan. Billy
Okay.
Corgan's a huge fan. Like,
Yeah,
what's the lead singer from Hailstorm? Lizzie Hale.
Lizzie. Yeah, Lizzie.
Yeah, she's a big fan of them. Like,
Failure. Cool.
yeah, Failure. The album is Fantastic Planet. That's the album that really got them like famous. But I think they put out 4 albums total. But very sonic, very heavy, but like also just beautiful.
Cool.
Really interesting, chasm of sounds.
Dude. I mean, yeah, Ear Candy is awesome. That's actually, I mean, again, the garbage albums are not as inspired as they used to be, but that stuff used to be something where you could just kind of keep listening in to whatever depth you wanted to, rhythmically or melodically or anything like that. So, yeah, anything you can kind of dig in a little bit is usually my idea of fun.
Yeah, I'm pretty
So,
sure that Garbage opened up for Smashing Pumpkins on their
mhm.
Somebody's Dreamed or on the Melancholy tour.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
yep,
Yeah.
yep. And
I was,
actually, Garbage, the band that opened for Garbage, um, I saw Garbage at 9:30 Club. That was the first place I saw them play.
nice.
And hang on, because I'm half lose. Abandoned Pools was the band that opened for them.
Okay.
Who is the lead? Again, who's one of these like project serial project people. Like he kind of goes from thing to thing. So he's
Sure.
more famous for some other things, but he did like 3 records of some pretty, like that's not garbage, but it goes with it,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of stuff. Um, so I used to like you find music live that you're a little surprised about. You're like, oh, what's this? Like you're at a show and the opener doesn't stink. Well, like when the Police played the Park the last time they played, Sting's son was the opening band, Fiction Plane,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they were great. They're already broken up, but but it was fun. Like he plays bass like his dad, jumping all over the stage and stuff, and you're like, geez, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Um,
Bono's son is an Inhaler.
we did Inhaler. We closed the season last year at the Pier with Inhaler, and
Yeah,
I did not hate them. They were good.
yeah, they're
They were
good.
being very tightly managed. They had a big, for playing 3,500 cap. They were they had a lot of professionals with them, which I guess makes an amount of sense. But like their producer was there, very involved in the mix, really wanting to make it sound like the album, and rehearsed the full band. Like it wasn't just sound check; they rehearsed stuff. So they were definitely being pretty pro.
Yeah,
So that was cool.
yeah. So
Uh,
talk about that Pier 17, man. Like,
yeah,
talk about the venue, talk about how that all came about, like that relationship.
yeah. So if you want to go with the like, again that whole like be involved tagline, um, we have been a user of EAW's. That's Eastern Acoustic Works. They're from Massachusetts, um, loudspeaker manufacturer from back in the day. We've been involved in their technology called Adaptive, which is a technology that they were woodshedding for quite a while. And it is their approach, and then some would say it is the best approach. I'm in that category, but there's data and presentational things to back some of that up. Whether people want to, at the end of the day, you choose your tools, but in short, the speaker family is called Adaptive because they offer traditional speakers as well. But there's 4 products that they build, which are building block style and I'm trying to get through the trying to get through the physics in no time or explanation at all. But basically, as you assemble multiple speakers, when you do that in a traditional sound system, whether you stack them on top of each other, whether you hang them in a line or in a J, as they call it, whether they're set up side by side, there's always a penalty to commingling speakers. They don't get along perfectly at all frequencies, and there's a lot of work done to try to compensate for those interferences um, to differing amounts. And as the tech has gotten better and more powerful and manufacturing tolerances are better, these things have been improved upon constantly since everybody started building speakers. Um, but there are other ways to make speakers work well together. Um, EAW took two technologies that they had since the 90s that they were deploying in an analog method and took that method, which is based on physics and acoustics, and basically just said, what if we made a speaker do something that we haven't done with it before? And so they made a sound system where the speaker, call them modules, but essentially it's a every device is a speaker. Like if you go to a concert, you have a line array with 12 speakers in it. Well, every adaptive speaker module would be a speaker of that, so you'd have 12 of them. The thing is, the way that they have built the speakers uh, to connect together and to sit, they all sit straight up and down. They don't curve or anything.
Hmm.
It aligns every driver in the stack correctly so that they all work together without any kind of interference. Then they applied a lot of DSP and math to create all the um, basically the algorithm that then allows them to control the sound leaving the speaker system in one big um, form. So the speaker system, no matter how many speakers are in it, acts like one big speaker.
Hmm.
So then within that, they can change the relationship of every little driver element to change the shape of the sound coming out.
Sure.
And they can contour it to the seating plane or to make it go tight and very far. And basically, the promise of that is that they can produce the same listening result in every seat in a venue, or alter it if they want, but also not put sound where you don't want it, so it's not bouncing all over the place, and do it with extreme fidelity, with no um, destructive interference.
Gotcha.
And that's not an achievement that's being done by anybody else. At the same time, everyone's still going along with their relative technologies, but there are people that like the adaptive sound system. Um, Robert Scoville is one of those people. He's been Kenny Chesney's touring engineer for the last, what, 3 years now, 4 years. Um, Previous to that, he worked for Tom Petty, and we met him on Petty. So we got into this adaptive technology when it came out originally because we felt it was a differentiator for us. Instead of going and buying the sound system that everybody uses and becoming competitors to them, why don't we continue to kind of own that idea that we bring the right tool to the job and that we have more creativity that to be deployed into certain situations. Um, so we thought that this fit well within our offerings. So the the speaker system is from a mixing point of view, it's a very different kind of feel when you mix on it because it's very responsive. When you turn an EQ, you quickly hear a result. You don't have to like turn it way over. And again, we wouldn't have the time, but we could go through all the reasons why what's happening happens more easily.
Right.
But so it's very responsive as a mixer, and then the ability as a system engineer to control the way it's covering and even make changes during the show and that kind of stuff. Um, is quite powerful. And it's a great tool for noise abatement. That's why it's at the pier. So we kind of have these two different fronts, which is you've got, tastemakers like Robert out there who work with big pedigree. I mean, he used to mix Def Leppard back in the day. He mixed Rush, which I'm super jealous of because I didn't know him when he was doing that. And then the Petty thing, which is pretty great. We were out on the Petty tour whenever they did their delay towers. We would come out and do those with them. We did Wrigley Field, we did Safeco, we Hollywood Bowl. So that's where so we got into that orbit with that. And as the pier was opening up, to open up an open air concert venue in New York City, you're on the radar with a lot of people. So the only way they would permit the venue was that they had to do the acoustical studies to prove that they could do concert level sound without annoying all the neighbors. And there's a couple of magazine articles out. One that I was involved in, um, actually in a German magazine, and it's about the whole process of working through all of that. But
Yeah.
basically, the sound system allows us to aim the coverage of the system, even though the speakers are flat. The coverage at the end of the day is aimed down onto the audience
Mhm.
properly, and it's not shooting off the top of the roof. And the difference is pretty dramatic. You can be in concert level sound in the middle of the audience and walk what we call out of coverage, which is outside the area it should be covering, and you can take a phone call and you can go back in and back out. It's not a wall; it's just a very good drop, and it drops evenly. It doesn't drop at only certain frequencies. It is a very smooth transition. So we had to do a proof of concept up there before they ever built any of the staging. Uh, so we were there for a day. They brought in an acoustical engineering firm called ARUP, who sent um, the 20 different noise monitoring people with recorders, SPL meters, and pad of paper. And they went to the predetermined locations all around Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. And we played a loop of music, pink noise at 105 dB C weight. Um, and then on the clock, they would note, record what you hear. If there's anything to hear, use the meter. And then they had to compile this huge study that basically said that we're not disturbing the neighborhood. Um, and so the venue got open based on the sound system there. So we became the in-house vendor of record for that system. One, because it's a concert venue and it does need a crew, but two, because we're specialists in the tech and it is treated a bit more seriously there because again, if they were to run afoul of any of the neighbors, or there's a boardroom in a building somewhere in the middle of the day and we're doing a sound check, like that's a problem. The mayor's office is going to call. So it's been a great relationship. We're in our seventh season there, and the exposure for us, we've been stewards of the technology there. Been able to make it a positive experience for most people, um, mixing on it, and it's been good because it's nice to work on something that isn't just your average everyday whatnot, and that's a place where we are certainly making a difference in the venue. And then it's also been fun over the 7 years. We've learned different ways of presenting the tech to new people, not scaring them, because a lot of engineers hear about what it does, they assume it does things when they don't know how it does it.
Yeah.
The funny part is it's not using active DSP to do anything. The algorithm just creates an instruction set that
Right.
goes to the amplifiers that tells it what EQ to use, what delay to use, and all that stuff. And once it's loaded, it's just off and running. So, in a way, it's very high tech in that it was designed for something, and the algorithm that they use is obviously highly secretive. However, what it's doing at the end of the day is the same thing everything else does, but it's doing it in a very consistent way. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It would be like it would be awesome just to see like and to experience that where like I could do a podcast outside of that area while the concert's going on.
That would be awesome. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, there's restaurants down on the main deck. I mean, there's stuff everywhere. That place has to be a good neighbor. Um, um, we regularly will take a walk around the neighborhood when there's a show going on, just to be aware. But the West Side Highway is louder than the show. Um, the D, every bar has a DJ. We can hear the DJs on the roof when they can't hear us, which is kind of funny because you kind of want to be like, turn it down. But like it's a great use case, and there's for the couple of their sisters, there's a system out in Napa, California that has a noise. It's exactly this kind of same idea.
Okay.
Due to noise control, this is deployed, um, and there was one other one in California near kind of near LA, not Costa Mesa, somewhere near LA. Um, Same use case. So it's popular as a problem solver. We use it in St. Louis with the symphony. Um, they'll be coming up in September. They do their outdoor show, and we actually shoot up a hill in their park. They have a big park with a very steep hill. It's about 500 feet to the back, and you can't see detail in the symphony, but the show sounds like it's right in front of you. And the first time we did that show for them, they were completely gobsmacked. And actually, their personnel are featured in an EAW like commercial that they run at trade shows and stuff like that because they articulated very nicely like here's why we think it sounds good. Here's the
Yeah.
people that have noticed and that kind of thing. So it's just nice. Everybody wants to do good sound. You don't get a chance to do it all the time. When we engaged with this technology, I had said it kind of brought some fun back into it. Like a lot of jobs here in the service business, like make it loud, get everybody going, and then basically plan for the loadout. So it's fun to be able to focus back into like, yeah, we can actually make this sound pretty good. We can solve this problem, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, Chris, I mean, like it's so cool and like it's so refreshing to hear like this side of like, the industry, So I
yeah,
appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you taking the time. And
absolutely.
thank you so much for doing it, man.
Yeah, what a chance meeting, like run into you at the place and
Yeah.
being like, what the heck? So,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's lots of professionals floating around that have lots of interesting things to say. So, I mean, as you guys go down the road, if I can make any introductions, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would absolutely appreciate that, man. So thank you so much. And I think you might be the closest person that I've Zoom interviewed. Like we're half an hour away.
Yeah, right. We could have just yelled across the street or something, I
Could
imagine.
have
But
done the old
yep, yep. That'd be spectacular. No, this has been great. It's been great because this is also the kind of things. I mean, I don't think of everything I just said, and then I say something I haven't said in 15 years, and I go, oh. So it's a
Yeah.
trip down memory lane for me.
Good stuff, man. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much and best of luck. Everybody check out Anderson Audio and go to Pier 17 in New York City to see this in full effect. So
Yep. Yeah,
again,
they've got a great. I mean, the concert series is solid. They've got the web. I mean, if you start typing Pier 17 into Google, that's like the first hit. Primus is coming up next week.
hell yeah.
Yep.
Good stuff. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as always, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, our social media pages. That helps us, that helps the bands, artists, and industry professionals like Mr. Chris here. Also, check out our sponsor, RAR Outfitters. That's RAWR, outfitters.com. Don't just wear, RAR. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Dog. You've been great. This is the Music Lab Podcast.